Okay, so someone asked me to make a tutorial showing how to make a game like Word Cookie. I'd never heard of it before, but they provided a link, and basically what it is at the top you have a bunch of boxes. Like there'll be, say, three empty boxes, and then four empty boxes. And at the bottom you'll have four letters, like NWIE. Well, the top box, the ones that with three, would be new, NEW. And then the four boxes would be wine, W-I-N-E. So what's happening is you're getting these scrambled letters and you're trying to find out all the words that are within those letters. And basically the game is just giving you a hint. It's showing you how many letters and how many words. So that's what we're going to do. So this is going to be an iterative process where at first we'll have a set amount of letters and a set amount of words that can be found. And that gives us something to design and wrap the code around, and then we can build upon that and say, okay, now we can have a range of letters and a range of words. So let's get started. This is going to be in the 2D version because there's no reason to mess around with 3D. And I'll probably, rather than using the built-in GUI, the built-in UI, rather than using UI objects, I'll probably actually just use regular objects that have a text, a text mesh. It's very easy to work with. Some have argued, well, you know, the UI is better. Maybe at the end I'll do like a quick summary of how to do it with the UI. It's just I find the text meshes to be easier to explain, and that it's a more straightforward process. So here's what we're going to do. As you can see, there are just two objects down here. So let's take this first one, just drag and drop it up here. This is going to be where the letters appear. So click a little plus sign tool here, and we're going to move that towards the bottom. Now this is probably a little bit small, and if you're ever wondering how something should look, you can just hit the play. This is the size the screen's going to be depending on the settings you have. But that's how big it's going to be on the screen, so kind of small. So if you find that object needs to be enlarged, there's a couple ways you can do it. You can click on the asset itself and change pixels per unit. To make it bigger, you'd actually reduce this number because it's a ratio. So let's drop this down to 80 and watch what happens. It got bigger and it really isn't blurry. So depending on what you're doing, you could just do that to fix an issue, but it's better to have the right size to begin with. By the way, the second way to do it is rather than changing the rather than changing the asset size, you can change the object size. You can just use scale here. The difference is any instance of this asset, by changing the pixels per unit, every single instance will get bigger. Whereas if I click on this, only this instance will get bigger. I'll show you what I mean. So not trying to get sidetracked, but if I copy this and I paste it and I move it over and I change the scale, say to 2 by 2, only that one got bigger. But if I was to come down here and change this to say 60, they both get bigger. So make your decision accordingly as to whether or not you try to change one instance or all instances. And if we decide that that's not big enough, we can always change it. This isn't etched in stone. As you've seen, I just changed it a couple times. Okay, so at the top is where you're going to have your letters. So let's take this letter box and we'll just put it here. And that actually looks about the right size. So we'll take that, we'll copy, paste, copy, paste. Now, keep in mind, we said that to begin with, there's only going to be a 3-letter or a 4-letter word, which means that eventually you're not going to have these here to begin with. You're going to write some code that says, okay, how many boxes are here, because maybe you're going to have a 5-letter word or a 6-letter word. So again, please be patient. We will get to that eventually, but we need to start with the basics so you can see how it works. And then I'm just going to copy these, copy and paste, move them down. Move them over, and then add one more. And there's better ways to line it up than just eyeballing it, but it's a fairly simple game, and like I said, we're just trying to get the basic layout. So let's go ahead and run that. Okay, so far so good. We got the blank letters at the blank spaces, excuse me, for the letters at the top, and then the area at the bottom where your actual words are gonna. Well, these are where you're gonna spell out the words. These are where the random letters are gonna be. So how do we do this? What we need is that within every box, we need an object that can change to the corresponding letters. So what we're going to do is for each box, there's going to be a corresponding object that has a text mesh. So, game object, create empty, and we'll call this we'll just call this letter. We'll position it here. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a component, mesh, text mesh, and just for demonstrative purposes, we're going to put a letter in here, but it won't be permanent. So now this gives an idea of the size and the positioning. Now, a few things to keep in mind. Anchor, upper left. Well, letters are of different sizes, so you really don't want the upper left, because watch what happens. If I change this to, say, a number 1, it's pushed off to the side. Or an I, it's pushed off to the side. So the default anchor you don't want. You want to change this to middle center. So that requires this to be repositioned. And if you're wondering how I'm doing that, zooming in and out, that's just using the scroll wheel on the mouse. So now let's try this again. So there's W, there's R, oops, only one at a time. There's W, there's R, I. So little things like that make a big difference as far as presentation. So we're changing the anchor to middle center. Now let's change character size because this is really blurry. Let's make this 0.2. Font will be Arial, but I believe it's using that by default since I didn't declare one. Now font size, let's make this like 32, 48. Let's use a capital letters. See how that looks. Let's make this 60. Okay, that looks good. And as you can see, it's not blurry now. So that's about right because you want to test the largest letter possible to make sure it's not going over the borders. So we'll leave it at that as a 60. Now what we want to do, remove that. Well, actually, we'll leave it for the moment. That way it's easy to line up these other ones. Copy, paste, move it over. Copy, paste, move it over, copy, paste, move it down, move it over, and again, the reason why I'm doing this is we need, rather than doing just 2 text meshes, you need each letter to be independent. So that's why we needed so many text meshes. Okay, so now if you highlight a bunch of the same object, you can see that since they all have a text mesh, we can just change it all at once. So you haven't deleted the object, you just deleted the text. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create a few more text meshes and put them down here. And actually, to keep the size the same, I think we will make this a little bit bigger. So let's make this 1.2, 1.2. Yeah, I think that'll help. Okay, so now, why reinvent the wheel? You already have a text mesh. So copy and paste. Move it down. Again, let's put a letter in there for the purposes of lining it up. And we'll call this, just to differentiate it, bottom letter. And the reason why I'm not naming this after what the letter is actually going to be is because, as I said, these will eventually change. Okay. So, we now have letter holders up here. There's just nothing in them at the moment, and the letter holders down here. So let's go ahead and set these to what they're going to be to begin with. Don't worry too much about the naming at the moment, the naming of these objects. So they do need to be named, but as you can see, you can change them at any time. And right now, we're not going to do any coding that's going to look at the actual name. So if you name this slightly different, that's fine. Now, I suppose we could have actually had 2 letters and then 3 and then 4, because you could do we, you could do in. So you do have other choices, but there's probably a certain minimum you want, because many different combinations of one consonant and one vowel make a word. So make a minimum barrier to entry that has to be at least 3 characters. So let's see how this looks. Okay, so nothing is happening yet. But what we are going to do is when we click on an object, or when we click on one of the letters, we want it to appear up here. Now, you got a couple possibilities. You can have it appear as you're clicking, or it appears after you've selected all of them. So first thing we need to do is make these clickable. So let's go ahead and select our 4 bottom letters, add component, physics 2D, box collider, is trigger. All absolutely necessary if you want to be able to click with a mouse, to mouse click on an object. So it has a 2D box collider, and it needs to be set as a trigger. Now what we're going to do is we're going to make our first script that's going to start to control that functionality, and then I think that will be it for this first video. So what we're going to do is, as you've seen, you can create objects. You can also create scripts. So right click, create, C#, and we're going to call this click control. And again, you can select multiple objects, drag and drop the script onto it, which at the moment does nothing, but now you can double click to open it up. To zoom in, hold the control key and scroll with the mouse. Now, hopefully I don't make a mistake here. If I do, I'll probably leave it because it's a good teachable moment, and that is, just as there is a start section, which gets performed when the object is created, which is usually at the start of the scene, but not necessarily. And this, anything that's in here happens with every single frame. And you can see there's a description above each one of those that tells you that. Well, in addition to start and update, there are other predefined routines. So, void on mouse down and what I'm getting at is that this is A, case sensitive, so the OMD has to be down, and if I made any other mistakes, it won't work. So before we go any further, we're just going to put in debug.log, and we're going to put in here, quote, click worked. In other words, you're just giving yourself a message. So you're saying in the debug log, have this be printed when the on mouse down occurs. Debug shows down here in the lower left corner. So let's see if this works. Make sure to save. I'm going to click. Click worked. I very strongly recommend that you do what I just did whenever you're trying new functionality, particularly when it comes to collisions and mouse clicks and things like that, because it's so easy to get this wrong. This is a simpler one, but when you get into like on trigger enter, on collision enter, on collider enter, things like that, it gets really easy to make mistakes. It was really easy to make a mistake, so I recommend always testing it. So now, just like that, it's testable. It's clickable. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to do one more thing. We are going to, rather than say click worked, we're going to grab the value of what we're clicking on. Well, you can say, well, how do you do that? Because that value is stored here in the text field of the text mesh objects. These are called, components, my apologies. These are called components. So the transform component, the mesh renderer, the text mesh component, box collider component, that's why it says add component. These are all components. So the text mesh component has a text field. So you can take that field and drop it in to somewhere else. So debug log is equal to get component. Which component? Well, we said it's the text mesh component. And it's a text field. And that's it. So we're saying, again, in the debug log, print this. So what get component does is it gets the component of the object that the script is attached to. This script is attached to all four of these bottom letter objects. So if you're clicking on one of them, it says, all right, we'll take the text field of the one that is being clicked on. And this is a very important concept, the idea that these values can be transferred from one place to another. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. And that's very important because what happens is rather than put it into the debug log here, we're going to have it put up here. Like I said, there's two ways to do this. You can either have it spell out as you're clicking on it, or you can have it spell out once you've clicked on everything. So it's good to keep your options open, and that's what this does. So I think that's it for the first video. If you have any questions, let me know, and that should about do it.